we're going to be hearing from Quentin Williams of the Joyce Foundation and Celinda Lake of Lake Research Partners. They're going to be sharing with us a presentation on some polling data that was recently conducted about the public's views of alternative response and perceptions, and also share some insights about how all of us doing this work can think about communicating it and framing it moving forward. So thank you all.
I'm really excited to be in this room. Just really quick, as Freya said, I'm a program officer in the Gun Violence Prevention and Justice Reform Program at the Joyce Foundation. For those of you who don't know the Joyce Foundation, it's a nonpartisan private foundation that invests in policies and strategies to advance racial equity and economic mobility in the Great Lakes region. We're a regional funder. And to that end, we have funding across 6 different program areas, and gun violence prevention and justice reform is one of them. I just wanted to quickly, before we jump in, and Celinda is going to introduce herself when she starts, about just the impetus for this polling project in the first place. The reason why we at Joyce wanted to bring Celinda on to do, and her team to do this polling is because, you know, I was learning, and I've heard about many of the programs that have been discussed today. And in particular, the CARES pilot in Chicago that Rebecca and the Health Lab are doing the process evaluation for. It just struck me that not too many people, and I think Rebecca could co-sign this, is that not too many people knew about it. Even though we would get these reports, they would be like, no uses of force, no arrests, yay. And then I would be like, man, this is cool. I would tell like my cousin or something, and he'd be like, what you talking about? And that was just an example of, you know, and I was like, man, like, you know, so that's one thing. And we'll talk about this more about like, how do we sort of get get people to understand this? But then I had a bigger question because as Carlton just stated, like a lot of programs and pilots, they operate at certain times. They're very small in scale. And when we talk about the issue of first response, like it's a big problem and it's a 24-hour problem. But what that's going to take is money, right? And we're the funders in the room, right? I'm a funder too, but we would like to see the government fund more of this stuff, right? Like, because to be honest, like the philanthropy couldn't sustain, you know, this in the way that we want to see it. But what that's going to take, we talked a little bit about the political context, right? Like, you know, the defund versus all of that, right? And I think I was also struck by how, because not too many people know about it, it's kind of flown under the radar of political divisiveness. But I think though, as we continue to think about how do we make these larger, scale these up and have them go for 24 hours, I think the budget questions will come in, and then the policymakers will be necessarily involved. And so we wanted to really assess like what folks think about this. And we asked questions about co-responder versus alternate responder, CVI. So we came away with a lot of insights. So we hope that there will be some great insights from this today. So yeah, that was a long intro, but
that was a great intro. Thank you so much. And it's really a privilege to be here with all of you. And we think this is some of the most important work that we get to do in our firm. And I want to acknowledge Daniel Godoff, who's the head of this team, and Sandra Markowitz, who worked on it as well. And Quentin was an amazing intellectual force on this data. So the things you like, he deserves credit for. The things you don't like, I'll take the blame. The goal here of this research was to really do a comprehensive study. And you can see the methodology here. It was a very large survey with, we call them oversamples in our business. What we really feel is that it's appropriate sampling to really be representative of all of the voices out there. And we did this with a Republican pollster as well. So all of these questions went through a bipartisan lens. We looked at every aspect of this issue, and our goal is to understand where the public is at. But our goal is not to stop there, but you can't understand where you can't move the public if you don't know where they're at. And so we looked at where they're at, and we also looked at what are the blockages, and then we looked at what are the ways to move them. And a lot of the blockages, frankly, are not opposition. A lot of the blockages are real absence of a template, that people really don't know what we're talking about. And I was thinking even of we have a saying in our business, didn't your mom tell you to leave your acronyms at home? It's very rude to bring out your acronyms in public because people are like stuck on the letters like, what's that, CPI or CDI or MBA? That I know. So I want to understand exactly where the public's coming from. Let me summarize a couple of key findings, and then and then we'll go through the data and see if you conclude the same thing. So there is a very, very strong appetite. Now is the time to have this conversation with the public. On the one hand, the public has no idea what we're talking about. That's kind of consoling, kind of like talking to your 4-year-old. The other half is that the public's really willing to do something different. People are really, really open to change. And the linkages of safety with health, and you'll see how I was really interested in seeing the previous speaker use that paradigm, because boy, does it come through in the data. So in some ways, the public's ahead of where the political dialogue is. People really want to combine things with traditional methodologies. They are afraid of two things, though. They know what a mental health template is, and boy, the public is roaring out with mental health. They know who would provide that. They think they know how it would be done. They think it should be funded. Millennials and anybody under 40 is absolutely crazed about mental health. They will add it to every policy. Fixed transit, yes, and add mental health. Fixed housing, yes, and add mental health. Education, healthcare. They are just crazed about this issue. But it's an existing template. People think, oh, I know how mental health is delivered. I know what that is. I know who would do it. A lot of the other things we talk about, and Quentin will talk about this more, people have no idea, like, who is that? Who's doing that? How does it get done? People also want backup, and probably some of the depressing data for some of us in this room that I'll show you is the number of situations that people would combine police in. They really think that situations can escalate pretty fast and get out of hand in today's world. And so they have an enormous appetite for co-models or backup models, less than some of us might have liked for solo models. But that's why but we shouldn't let one get in the way of the other. There is a tremendous appetite to move this forward in important ways. Interestingly, one of the things that's great about these, people are very leery of everything right now. They think the 4th of July is partisanly polarizing. Somebody's going to say they're not for the 4th of July. And so let's not talk about the 4th of July. And people think that every policy is polarized and that people deliberately make them polarized to benefit from it politically. What was really interestingly here is that people did not see these reforms as controversial. They thought, oh, yeah, this is something we could all agree on. And they also did not see it as antagonistic toward the police, and thought that this is a way of garnering a broader set of support, a broader set of actors. Overwhelmingly, people believe that both parties need to work together to address the root causes of crime and violence. And there was a little bit of tension if my Republican colleague had been here today, who would have said around paying for it. But other than that, and that's a big other, but other than that, people really do think that both parties should work together, and why can't you? And they think we're spending an awful lot of money in this area already. So if we could spend it better, if we could spend it in new ways or combination of old and new ways, people are quite open to it. People overwhelmingly agree that we should do a better job matching the right professionals to every 911 call. Now, there are two things about this that are really interesting when you see the data. First of all, we are massively underutilizing 911 people as credentialers, as people in this dialogue. People have enormous affection for them. They think they're wildly underpaid. They think they are very well-intentioned. They think they kind of know what they're doing. And in a surprising way, and both using them as a validator and as part of the co-responding team Very, very, very popular for voters. Voters also have no idea what 911 operators do. They assume that 98% of 911 responders are responding to violent incidents. They're flabbergasted when they're told it's two. Absolutely flabbergasted. And it makes them much more open to alternative models. Now, we should remember two things. First of all, America is really bad at math. Just as a general conclusion, something that you can apply throughout your life, America is bad at math. And so the numbers that work don't work because of the precision of them. They work because they're a metaphor. And one of the more interesting researches we did once when we were trying to get the gun show loophole closed in California, we used the number 6 times more gun dealers than McDonald's. And people got it wrong. They said, oh, 6 times, oh, 16 times, oh, 600 times. But the metaphor worked because the point was you were passing a heck of a lot of gun dealers on the way to get that Big Mac. And that was pretty surprising to people. So think of this as a metaphor that just really reorients rather than your excuse to load everybody up with all kinds of statistics. And people can usually only remember one number at a time. They can remember 3 things in one number. Remember also that your average soundbite now is no longer 30 seconds, it's 9 seconds. So when you're practicing your explanation, you got to get it down to 9 seconds. Solid majorities believe we should not use police for mental distress calls. That is the one area that they're really clear about. And the reason they're clear about it, because they have an alternative. They are not clear who else is going where and how does that work. With mental health, they think, I'm clear. We got mental health specialists. We should be sending them more. We should be training lots more. We should be having them out there and everything. And they think they have a template. So again, let's not suppose that opposition is rooted in antagonism or opposition. Often it's just rooted in an absolute blank slate that we can paint on. Really, the data was remarkably good. There were a lot fewer vulnerabilities than we would have thought. And there was a lot of bipartisanship here. This, if you were asking a bunch of pollsters, if you brought a bunch of pollsters or a bunch of people like yourselves involved in the field, and you said, let's pick a field that's bipartisan right now, this would not be the first one you would have come to. But it is stunningly bipartisan in people's minds. And the more local the voices, the more local the action, the more bipartisan it is. And people do worry. The whole defund police is a whole nother conference, although obviously this overlaps with it. And we can talk about lots of ways. And I know Vera is in the house and has done a lot of great research on defunding the police. We were the pollsters for Brandon Johnson. So thank you, Quentin, for all you did on your off time. That cousin voted for Brandon, I bet. Thank God. There are ways around the defund police, but people do have it as a very ready crutch. And they do worry that these alternative models might be defunding the police. Americans in general want and, not or. And they really think the American way is and. Like, why are we choosing? Why can't we have it both? I mean, why did our families come from Italy if we can't have it both ways?
Something about that really quick,
please do.
Celinda, I don't think we have it on these slides, but that was one of the most stunning things about this, the degree to which Republican voters, when we asked, I think we asked a question about, what is like happening? Why is crime the way it is right now? And the large percentages of them saying that because police departments have been defunded, not that they are going to be defunded, that they have been. I was like, oh my God. Like, I mean, there's a high percentage, and that was really stunning. So that whole conversation, to Celinda's point, is still to a crutch, right? Like, it still could be used to undermine some of these efforts.
Very, very good point. So let's go look at the first responders. So people support police both in their communities and nationally with very little differentiation. And there is remarkable support for police, even in communities that some elites assume will not be supportive, like African Americans and Latino voters, for example. And you can see here, if you agree or disagree, the vast majority of police officers nationally and then in your community want to do the right thing. And the feeling is overwhelmingly that that's true. including in the African-American community. Now, in the African-American community, there's a big difference by age, as you might imagine. The younger you are, the less likely you are to believe that. But in general, there's an awful lot of consensus about that. Who do you consider first responders? People think lots of people are first responders. Now that you asked me, I had never thought about it, but paramedics, firefighters, police officers, ambulance drivers, 911 dispatchers, and then healthcare professionals as well. Now, they think a lot of healthcare professionals are not first responders because the first responders bring the situation to the healthcare professionals, but there is a very, very strong connection to health, and people feel very strongly about it. People do not see psychiatrists, community-based violence interrupters, trained social workers, community-based violence intervention specialists, and mental health professionals. They're split on. But all these other categories of people that we use, people do not think of as necessarily first responders. But big warning here. Most people have no idea who the heck we're talking about. Like, what is a community-based violence interrupter? Sounds really good, but what is that? Is that a dog? Is that a person? Is that an organization? Is that a program? So if I don't know them, and remember that people get 99% of their perceptions about crime and first responders, not from their personal experience, but from Chicago firefighters, Law and Order, CSI. So those are the things that are really influencing a lot of people's perceptions about who's what. And in fact, one of the things we ought to be doing, new job for Carlton, he should be going to Hollywood writers and saying, we need episodes that show this, because that's how we're going to educate the public really fast. In terms of favorability, people love lots of people, and they think they're very effective. They love firefighters, paramedics, 911 dispatchers, mental health professionals, law enforcement officers in their community, police officers in their community, social workers. They are less fond of the Fraternal Order of Police, but then a lot of people don't know what the Fraternal Order of Police is, and it's usually portrayed in a bad light. Different people make a big distinction in most big cities between their police departments and the Fraternal Order of Police. On the effectiveness side, people think paramedics are effective, firefighters, police officers, 911, ambulance drivers, mental health professionals, nurses, trained social workers, psychiatrists, community-based violence intervention specialists, and community-based violence interrupters. Now, they really like the intervention word even better than interrupt, because interrupt sounds like it might get kind of tense and it might get kind of violent, and maybe you need a police there when you're interrupting. But if you're intervening, okay, well, that might be all of us together. That might be calming things down. Notice people are liking and thinking are effective are several categories that they just told us they had no idea who these were, but they sound really good. And so I like them, and I think they would be effective. One of the things we often say to our political clients is voters hold mutually contradictory views and usually deeply resent having it pointed out to them. So that applies to your work as well. People are really split about whether they have enough support or not, in part because they're really split about who's doing what and when does someone come in. They do think that 911 people are underpaid. That's largely driven by the fact that they just think that's a really hard job and they really like them. And so they think by definition, they're probably underpaid. They trust 911 dispatchers to decide what professionals. This is really interesting. We might have thought that because this is a question of expertise in people's minds as well as the right orientation. And people attribute to 911 dispatchers a lot of expertise, particularly a lot of expertise learned over time on the job. We need to reduce the number of encounters between the police and members of the community. Many people agree with that. First responders have enough training so they can be successful. People always like everybody trained more, but they do think that 911 dispatchers have quite a bit of training. People think that if you reduce the encounters, it will lead to less violence. People worry that increasing the funding, and this is the interesting point that Quentin was talking about, 50% say, and they're primarily Republicans, I worry that increasing funding for alternative responders to 911 will lead to defunding of the police. People are really nervous about this trade-off, and they think, as Clinton said, that we are way down the road on this, rather than this is a debate, that we've already gone way down the road on this. First responders have enough support so that they can be successful. People definitely don't think first responders have enough support. Now, we used to use all kinds of euphemisms for spending money, and people figured it out. They have now figured out that investment means money. They've now figured out that support usually means money, and the only place they can think of money coming from is taxes. And yet, you will see in a moment some stunning data on investment.
And nobody likes taxes.
And nobody likes taxes, no. But people are for funding the IRS, and the IRS has more favorable ratings than Congress right now, FYI. That's a stat you can share at cocktail parties. So what people really like is a combination of co-responders and alternative responders. And again, people believe in general, this is the American way, right? We have a little bit of everything. Like, why can't we do it all? Like, who said we couldn't have it both ways? That's why we came here, to have it both ways. And so in general, even in tough times, and it's particularly tough times right now, Americans don't approach things as zero sum. Our politicians are often approaching it as if their voters are approaching it as zero sum, but they're not. And they think sometimes that you can spend money and save it later on, that there is we could be doing things better. Now for the data that will, and let me pause for Quentin to add some comments here. For the data, get ready. If you had alcohol in that flask, my aunt used to always go around with a little alcohol in her flask. This would be the time to empty that flask. Just saying. But let me turn it to Quentin to share some of this data.
Yeah. I want to see who's pulling out the flask right now. It's like, maybe for somebody to pull
a secret chamber.
I'll be brief, but I think one of the things that was really, interesting to us was that the number of scenarios, because as we were developing this, we were thinking about, we want to put some scenarios in front of people and say, okay, for this scenario, do you think the police should be there, or should the police be there with somebody, and should no police be there? And there were so many situations where people wanted the police to be, or they said that the police should come to that. And because we even use some lists that are out there, maybe I think even the Policing Project and other folks have, like, for example, a blocked driveway, for example, like, yeah, police don't need to come to that, right? But here in these data, though, people are like, yeah, absolutely, they need to come for this blocked driveway. And the reason that we reasoned that was the case, though, is that folks were worried about things that could escalate to violence potentially, rather than just the situation. But a blocked driveway could, in folks' mind, lead to violence. And I think other situations that folks perceive that could eventually lead to a violent encounter, that's where they were like, well, the police should come to that. And I should say too, though, that, and Celinda alluded to this earlier, was that like people we don't have an idea of who would come to the blocked driveway scenario. Like, who is the professional that's going to show up? Who do you call and say, hey, Barry's going to show up. Yeah. Yeah, a tow truck, right? But I mean, you see these shows where they're chasing the tow truck guy down the street, you know what I mean? Like, but I don't think we just don't know, like, who are these, Celinda talked about people don't know who a community violence intervention groups, they respond to violent encounters all the time, but people don't have a picture in their mind, like who's going to show up to something like a blocked driveway.
This is another thing, by the way, that we could all work on. People are now moving away from national media sources to local news. Local news is an insatiable vehicle. It is also a vehicle that leads with crime all the time. We should provide some pictures for local media about alternative intervention. And that would particularly impact African Americans and particularly impact women, who are the big watchers of local news. We also, by the way, did a study where we found that the perception of crime in a neighborhood, in a city, is completely unrelated to the actual rate of crime. You all knew that. It is related, actually, to how many stories you have on the local news at night and in what order. Like if you have 5 stories in the beginning, then people think, whoa, crime's really on the rise. If you have 1 story at the end of the day, at the end of the news series, people think, and we should go to ed boards and say, you are making this a lot worse. But as Quentin said, speeding tickets, I think many of us have been horrified at some of the situations that have emerged out of traffic violations. They're not even violations, but presumed traffic. Look at the voters here. They're saying 82% of them saying, I want to send police, mostly police, not just some police and somebody else. I want to send police to that. So again, the absence of a template is just really, really stunning. This sea of red, which you can get all of these slides, it's just showing demographics and what you could see. If you could see this data, this is what pollsters always put up, because it means you have to have the pollster present the data, right? But this sea of red is that there's virtually no demographic difference here. Men and women, older, younger, by race, it's all very, very, very similar. 72% of African Americans say, I want police at a traffic violation. 76% of Latinos and 84% of whites. It is stunning how uniform these attitudes are. They also are higher with older voters. And guess who has the highest turnout in municipal elections? Older voters. We thought, okay, we've recovered from that. We drank the alcohol. Let's go to the next tier. It's got to be a lot better on the next tier. The green is, by the way, people who want mostly other professionals or only other professionals. And you will see here, broken taillights, shoplifting of items under $100, traffic accidents without injuries. People are, send the police, send the police, send the police. And again, a lot of this is because they think it can escalate. And a lot of it is because they can't figure out who else would you send.
And to Celinda's point about the news media too, I just wanted to add this, like we just came off of Memorial Day weekend, and I tell people this every single year. I said, I hate the local media, news media in Chicago on Memorial Days, because it's like they write the headline on Friday and Tuesday. That's where it is, because, although there were incidents, I don't want to undermine that, or diminish that. But there was a lot of other stuff going on, right? There's a lot of barbecue. There was a lot of peaceful, and then even some of our interventions, right? The flip areas, right? They didn't see that many shootings where we had community violence intervention workers. But those successes and the picture is just not there for the public. What they see is the red tape, the yellow tape, the police cars, and the sirens, and that's it. They don't see the community violence intervention workers that were out all weekend doing things. So,
by the way, of course, now you're prepared to be depressed, but I want to keep it up because I'm going to show you some better data later. Does that say noise complaints? Oh, next slide. Thank you. Noise complaints. Good Lord. 63% of people want to send the police to a noise complaint. So you tell your teenage son, stop that banging on the drums, because the neighbors are calling the police. Verbal disputes, blocked driveways, which I think is one of my favorites. Individuals panhandling, half the people would send a police for that. I mean, even the police wouldn't send the police for 99% of this stuff. It is really stunning. And again, what's stunning here is how little template people have. Now, there are some things that people think, no, I want to send mostly other professionals. And what they have in common are places where they can imagine another professional, like fires. Okay, I can imagine who to send to a fire. Send a firefighter to a fire. Like, does the police even know how to put the fire out? Calls involving animals. Okay, you got the Humane Society. What's really clear is when you provide people with a template, they are eager for that template, or in combination. They just don't have the template. Drug overdoses. It's also clear that anytime you have something that involves mental health, and those are the last 2 bars. Look at those really solidly green bars. That's mental health distress and anxiety and panic attacks, where people can imagine who else you would send, and they think they know. how that works, what the program would be, who gets to go, how it would be provided. And they think the 911 dispatcher would be perfectly good at providing that. Here's, now we're getting into Quentin's happy place, which is the really amazing data on investment. I'll let you start with this.
Yeah, so people overall are like, yeah, we need to invest in these different approaches. As you can see right here, I mean, overwhelming support, and it's across party lines, it's across race and ethnicity and gender, where we, again, so basically are like, yes, we should invest in this. But when you ask people, where are we going to get the money from? That's when it gets a little dicey, right? And I think we have a few slides where we talk about that. So, I mean, it's something I've been thinking a lot about as a funder, right? Like, what role can we play in advancing these conversations? But people are willing and they're like, yes, let's invest, but they don't know where the money's coming from. So,
one thing that's really important, and I want to underscore that wording at the top, we provided people with a list, not a comprehensive list, but a list of some ideas of who the alternative responders might be. We said other professionals, like mental health professionals, trained social workers, and or community-based violence intervention specialists. Remember, they didn't know who that was, but they become quite fond of them by now in the survey. So giving people a couple of examples. By the way, 3 is key. 3, people think when they've heard a list of 3, they've had completion. They can't remember more than 3 things. So you don't give them a list of 16. You give them a list of 3. But I think that really helped to boost this number because it generally right now, people are very loath to spend money on things they don't know what they're spending on. They're not loath to spend money. They're just loath to spend money on what they don't understand. Here they have modest understanding at best, and yet they're eager in part because we provided them an alternative template. So then we did what we call an engaged debate, and we had 2 versions of the engaged debate. And engaged debate means we provide the other side's argument. So half the people got the argument on the left, which is we need to stop putting police in unwinnable situations. We need pilot programs. We need solutions that are implemented at the national level as well as the state and local level. One thing that is bad is people have no trust for the national level anymore. But one thing that is good is I think most problems are national and need to be solved at the national level. So it's an interesting kind of contradiction. On the right, we tested an argument more about police budgets are growing. Remember, that's counter to what people are assuming. They think they're declining. Public safety not improving, and we need to implement proven solutions. We attack this with all the good words. We said we were socialist Democrats. This is another stat you can use at the cocktail party. 50% of Americans know what a socialist is, but 60% of Americans don't like socialists. So that's good. That's helpful. At least it's only a 10-point gap, not a 30-point gap. We need officers to protect ourselves. These people want to take away your guns. So they're not only defunding the police, they're going to take away your guns. And the paramedics and all the other professionals that we're sending that we really like are going to get killed if we don't send the police. So we obviously didn't pull our punches. You are going to be so excited about this data. We won both of these arguments solidly, not by just a little bit, by a lot. Our intense support is twice what the people who agree with the opposition side, our intense support. These numbers, also when political officials are giving you a hard time, just remember these numbers, now you probably don't want to volunteer it, but these numbers are higher than their favorability, whether they're a city council person, a mayor, or a state legislator. So we trounced with just an equal argument, and we used every buzzword. At the end of the survey, and this is unfair, this is after substantial messaging. This is having Quentin win the Powerball and then devoting it all to giving it to you to get the message out. But we're at really high numbers. We're at 76% support. We have a majority of everyone, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, and we have solid support across race. Frankly, we had solid support across race from the beginning. So what's some of the messaging that works? And let me have Quentin start with kind of what messaging is, and I can share my slide with you too. Okay. There's modern
So-
and then there's
So yes, we wanted to know like what, because at the beginning I stated that like I was um, surprised by the amount of people that didn't really know about these efforts and know about these different approaches. So we wanted to know like, well, what messages might work or what are compelling messages and messengers, because there's obviously some messages that need to go out. So we wanted to know like who these folks are, who would be. And the big picture here is that framing it as a healthcare issue, or it's about health, is the message that seemed to resonate the most with people. Just framing these additional approaches to addressing public safety as a health issue really resonated with voters, as well as some concrete examples of where stuff is working relatively well. Those were the two, I think, main messages that work. And then the messengers. One other thing though too that I think, again, working hand in hand with police, right? So again, people are not saying no police in this survey in particular. They're saying we need some additional things, and in the way that I've been thinking about this for a while now, relative to the police, right? Like the police have earned every bit of criticism and people wanting to, they've earned that, right? So I don't, you know, apologize. Like I'm like, yeah, you all earned that as a profession, right? Like, and what has been done to communities for years. And I think there can be a place. So, but their role now and barrier like this, right? Like I've cited his disaggregating the police function and what is public safety. Those are brilliant articles, Barry. See, and then, but I think just moving them around in the public safety infrastructure, like where they sit right now, it seems to be inappropriate and ineffective. And so I think people are open to that. I think they're open to that rather than removing them completely from the public safety infrastructure. I think people would be open to shuffling them in the public safety infrastructure.
The other thing that's really interesting is we did some work about, who goes in first, because we thought, okay, well, this is not too helpful if the social worker's back in the car and the mental health worker's back in the car and the police are going in, guns drawn, et cetera. And people were like, no, you could have the social worker go in first. That'd be cool, but just keep the police right at hand. So people are, again, more open than we would think. They're just really leery. They're just ignorant of the template and leery about things escalating to violence. Good. Oh, I forgot to turn to the right page. Sorry. Good messages have levels of support of about 60% total support and about 40% strong support. That dark blue number, you can see we have well over what we need in terms of overall support. So the conversation is open. People are nervous, though. This is a brand new conversation to most people. And so the intensity is down a little bit because people have to think about this and they want to hear who's saying this. Here's the message of the language of our top message. And again, the clear, not even like a feint toward healthcare, the direct linkage. We are underutilizing this healthcare. The public is way ahead of where the politicians are on this stuff. And a very, very strong notice. We also talk about 911. We talk about mental health. Anytime you can throw in mental health, it calms people down. We have two things. There's a thing in our business called fast thinking and slow thinking. Sometimes you want people to think fast so they don't reflect too much on it. Sometimes you want people to think slow. This is an area where you want them to think slow. If they think fast, they get scared. And mental health slows them down because they know what mental health is. They're super supportive of it. They're thinking, oh, I loved hearing that. And so it really works cognitively quite well too. Here's Quentin's message about the hand in hand. And notice that we're saying we need leaders that understand challenges police face, how to support them. We need to support leaders who support expanding approaches. And people really like that combination. Examples work amazingly well. Examples were actually the single strongest predictor of moving in your attitudes. Now, lots of times when people we always want storytelling in our profession. And about half the time, frankly, it doesn't work very well because people try to fix the story or the people rather than fix the situation. So, when we used to tell stories about minimum wage, and my favorite one was we told this story about this mom who had two kids, 12 and 13, and she was making minimum wage and couldn't make it. And they said, well, she shouldn't have had those kids. They're 12 and 13, a little late to be thinking that now. Well, she's on drugs. She's not drugs. She's working with drugs. She's got two teenagers. She doesn't have time for drugs. And people just trying to fix the person rather than the situation. This was a place where people lommed on. And I didn't think, honestly, the Eugene example would work that well because Chicago's one thing, but Eugene, like, where's Eugene? And who ever heard of it? And isn't that a hippie town anyway? And I'm from Montana, so I love Eugene, but realistically, but people loved both examples. They thought this is really good. I'm going to skip the next one, which is another hand in hand, the 911 one, the one that says less than 2% are violent emergencies. Again, it's not the absolute number. It's the ratio. It's the metaphor. Oh, wow. These people that I really love, that I think are very professional, that are handling a lot of things, they've got a lot of discretion. And so that seems like we could be using people a lot more. Who are our spokespeople? Well, you're going to guess this one, right? Mental health professionals. Like I said, people who put mental health professionals. Who's in the room is a mental health professional? God bless you, because you're now the number one favorite thing in people's minds. You can go to your kid's school and talk about your profession now. Everyone's going to love it. Paramedics, police officers who say this alternative approach is very reassuring to people. 911 dispatchers. God bless the 911 dispatchers. Interestingly, social workers, we had to qualify social workers. And you remember there's been some uneven data here. Believe it or not, people aren't sure what a social worker does. And they also thought, do we have social workers anymore? Because they think the social workers have been cut in the budgets, and a lot of social workers have been cut in the budget. Turns out you can only lie to the public so long. So it helps to qualify. Like a social worker in violence prevention. Oh, well, that kind of social worker, that'd be really good. I never heard of that, but that sounds great. We have recommendations for future research, but we can leave that for another time. Thank you so much.